very warm welcome to the Understanding Users podcast, brought to you by Researchable UX. It's great to have you with me. I'm your host, Mike Green. I'm a freelance user research lead and digital consultant based in the UK. Over the coming weeks, I'm going to be chatting to various digital experts who I've had the pleasure of working with in recent years. They're from various disciplines, including user research, UX design, development, and product management. And there'll even be a digital business owner or two. I'll be talking to them about how they came to be in their current roles, what they've learned along the way, and what advice they may have for others getting into the field. These are intended to be relaxed, informal chats with professionals who are keen to share their experiences. So sit back and enjoy.
In this episode of Understanding Users, Ben shares his view that technology should never be an end in itself, but rather a means of allowing users to achieve their desired goals and outcomes. He portrays his role as often being to facilitate the flow of information between the user and the product team, and talks of the vital importance of often dispersed development and UX teams being joined up as a product evolves. He cautions against the danger of allowing research participants to invent problems during the usability testing phase, and speaks of his firm belief that designers should always understand and keep in mind the medium they're designing for. Finally, he plays my 3-card challenge to share his favourite UX tool, favourite technique, and a trend he hopes to see in the future. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoy the episode.
So my guest this time is Ben Watson, and Ben is a freelance UX designer, currently working with the London Borough of Sutton here in the UK. And we've had the pleasure of working together 3 years ago now, was it, Ben?
3 years, yes.
Yeah, and it's great to have you on the show.
Well, thank you very much for getting in touch and having me on. I'm looking forward to catching up. As you say, it's been 3 years. I don't know how that's happened. So yeah, it's great to get to chat again.
So tell me a little bit about kind of what you're up to at the moment, the kind of work you're doing, and how you're working in Sutton, London Borough of Sutton.
So the work that I'm doing at the moment, it's just coming. The project itself's coming to an end. Actually, we had a product launch this week. So I've been working on a local authorities website, so a council website for the London Borough of Sutton, and it went live on this Monday, so the 31st of January. I've been involved for about 13 months. The process itself has been really quite interesting.
And you mentioned the multidisciplinary teams thing. What's the makeup of the team you're with at the moment in terms of kind of the roles and the size? And
part of the as a transformational piece, some of the team's been relatively transient. So we've many of the sort of the disciplines that would be more familiar with in perhaps central government or perhaps in other sort of enterprise sort of retraining. So we've had a series of previous sort of business analysts, in previous lives of business analysts, taking on sort of service design for the first time and doing a fantastic job. Sort of a really enthusiastic and capable team. Yeah, really buying into the process. So as I say, no one's necessarily come in with a particular title or label, but they've sort of fulfilling roles. So we've had a few fantastic sort of user researchers months before they would have been known as business analysts, coming under the wings of sort of more established and more practitioners and hit the ground running. So yeah, the makeup is really a lot of content design specialists, service designers, user researchers, and the organisation as well is looking to expand in those disciplines. So they've been actively recruiting and transforming.
And tell me about you, Ben. Like, how did you get into digital? What's the kind of your career trajectory to this point?
What kicked it all off is basically my first year of secondary school. So when I was 11 or 12, all of my friends went to a different school and they got taught how to build a website, and I was jealous. So I think I must have been 12 actually. I went and got a big book on HTML out of the library. So I won't say what year that was, but it was.
You're showing your age.
Yeah. There was no CSS in that book. There we are. I'll put it that way. It was all HTML and JavaScript. So yeah, I just had an interest because other people were doing it, and basically from the age of 12, I'd like to tinker and build things, and I just saw, I about 3-4 years later actually got the internet, and I can actually do things from a local thing on my go and work on other people's computers. I really like building basic sites without it having a purpose. So basically I continued doing that. I just continue build, like, I guess, like, not a technologist, but I like to build things for the sake of building things. And then by the time I hit sort of 17 or 18, I used it as a vehicle to basically a medium to sort of put sort of more artistic endeavors, like things that I was creating, music, art, and it actually had a purpose. So I had a vehicle to fulfill a purpose. And basically, I know it's a lot of background, but the reason for it is it was about the age of 18, when I had no intention of pursuing a career in what I've continued to do, that I saw basically the technology that I'd understood and had an interest in. It was only useful as a vehicle for other things. So it had to have a purpose. I'd learned that, building things just for the sake of building it, no one was interested. It wasn't really useful to anybody. It was fun for me, but it wasn't useful. To carry that on into I studied law actually at university, finished my degree, but I set up a company in the first year. Again, not for any sort of financial reasons, just because I really enjoyed doing it. And I won an award, Shell Technologies Enterprise Program. So I won a regional competition in web design against people that were studying the discipline. I did it because I enjoyed doing the thing, not with any particular goal in mind. And basically, I interned with a company and had to sort of build something for them. But essentially, that then sort of propelled people getting in touch. So I sort of paved my way through uni by building sites and learning more. And I realized that sort of at that point, and that's what I wanted to do, is I did it because I enjoyed it, but I was also studying something that I didn't really enjoy. I was doing sort of internships as well with solicitors, and I wasn't really enjoying it. So yeah, I just carried on. So I've basically been working for myself since I was 20. Doing things for the sake of doing things never really made sense. It's using technology to solve, to have a purpose for people is something that I really sort of is sort of really important to me.
So you are an award-winning UX designer in essence.
Yeah, you know what? It pretty much stopped there. There were a few more, but
Well, once an award, always an award. I think you should.
Yeah, I've got it up with my my 50 meters badge. Rescue the brick from the bottom of the pool.
Good for you. And I'm interested in you talking about kind of freelancing and going it alone, as it were, when I'm also a freelancer, as you know. Tell us about life as a freelancer, what you like about it, what you dislike about it, what are the challenges?
I will start off by saying that the one thing it's never been about is money. It's, for a lot of people, that may be a driver, but basically the decision to sort of work more as a freelancer, as consultant, to consult with people and help out, has never been about money. It's more to do with not keeping skills sharp, and this is like I say, just my personal view, sort of coming into things. It was more about wanting to take on a succinct challenge and task and see it through, and never, as soon as I'm not really useful, people don't want me around. I don't want to be around. So it's more constantly chasing, the excitement of learning, working with people that you can learn from, and just not moving over necessarily into what, I think things are very different now, but, back in the day, basically business as usual, keeping things ticking. Mindset has changed a great deal in the sort of the last, I'm giving things away now, aren't I? But sort of 15 years of operating commercially, and I think sort of BAU now is more continuing to iterate and that sort of thing. But I do enjoy succinct problems.
So I was going to say, what kind of projects do you like to get involved in? Can you think of any particular examples of things that you've particularly liked, or frustrations you've had? Don't have to use names if you don't want to, obviously.
No. Well, it's funny, isn't it? I mean, over the years that I've worked with some really, really interesting. So at the time, it was the biggest entertainment title ever released. I worked 10 years ago on Modern Warfare 3, which I loved Call of Duty at the time. I still do, but I was really into gaming. I worked on that, and that was super exciting. I worked in California for 3 months, and it was great. But the work, at the end of the day, the work is still the same as when the sorts of things that I'm doing now. When I'm speaking to someone with English as a second language, trying to work out their council tax. I know it sounds silly because one is on the face of it a bit more, I know, less sexy than
Glamorous, yeah.
yeah, right, than the other. But at the end of the day, the actual day to day tasks and the things that we sort of are calling, the techniques and things that we're doing. I consider myself in many respects to be like a conduit of information to really to speak to people and feed it into teams and things like that. In terms of the sorts of projects, I don't know. I know it's maybe a bit of a cop out answer, but I find most projects to be the same. If we're listening to people, we're designing for people using, I mean, I don't exclusively work with web technologies, but that's really where my forte is, because I understand them. I feel that brings a slight benefit from my perspective to also then progress into here's how we do it, and be aware of the constraints that we may have. So
on that note, you're talking about building for users. What does user-centered design mean to you?
Well, obviously, it's placing the user at the center of things, which unfortunately for many endeavors is potentially an afterthought. So there's often a mentality of build it and they will come. People just build things because they can. They've been given budget, and that heavily tech-laden teams will build. So obviously, it sounds silly, it sounds obvious, but it's placing a user at the center of everything that you're doing. So users, and actually, establishing whether there's a problem. Discovering if there's something worth that needs addressing, rather than doing something and finding a problem to solve. Which I know sounds may sound silly, but I've got to say that probably accounts for 50% of the work that I've ever done. It's someone doing something for the sake of it and then trying to retrofit not. I mean, they wouldn't have described it as a user need, but the user is an afterthought. So I think that for me, user-centric design is obviously placing the user at the forefront, and maybe sometimes having the difficult conversation, which is, I don't think this is not necessary, or maybe there's a different problem here to consider solving. So it's really, the user is at the forefront and is in absolutely every conversation to do with the work that you.
It's funny, isn't it? And I've had this conversation with so many guests on this show. Is once your eyes are open to user centricity and user centered design, you realize how many spheres of life are not designed with users in mind. I'll give you an example. At about 4 o'clock this morning, very unwelcome, the battery in our smoke alarm on the landing died, and it started beeping. So I was up there half asleep trying to get this thing off the ceiling and then trying to get the battery out of the back. And the instructions which were written on the back made almost no sense to me. I mean, I was half asleep, which probably didn't help. But I thought, if only you showed this to half a dozen people outside the factory that you manufactured this in and got them to read these, you would have written them in a completely different way. And it's user-centered design. It needs to be everywhere, and it's not.
The amount of say we've had a launch with a particular product this week, and some of the things some of the feedback that's been coming back from just from places, let's just say, often I suspect this. Has anyone raised this genuine, or is this the sort of the ability for people to put themselves in other people's shoes? So the invention of problems we often hear. Oh, but I think someone like this will struggle with this. It's often listening to the problems firsthand, and actually a lot of the things that have been raised with this particular thing are people projecting, and they haven't been raised firsthand, and these sorts of things. So I think it's also I often encounter not just stakeholders, but people you work with and people with the very best intentions, often projecting using this. They imagine a user might need something, and often mistake that for, being, I guess it's empathizing, but it's with something very fictional.
And without any evidence. It's that kind of evidence-based empathy that you need.
Absolutely. I remember a session once, observing a user research session, and someone was talking about, they were looking at something and they were like, yeah, this is fine, but if I was on a train and I had a tablet and they were inventing all of these sort of scenarios, I could never use this. And that was like, that's interesting. So the researcher, so do you travel a lot by train? Oh, no, never. And it's like, but you're a tablet user as well. Oh, no, I don't own a tablet, but I can just imagine. But the whole session was, trying to bring it back on track, trying to understand how this particular user would, observe the use of a particular prototype or project, and it was just impossible. We basically sort of abandoned the session at some point because it was impossible for them to not just invent scenarios, and they were pretending to be someone all the time. And
I've been in similar sessions where people are, as you say, the invention of problems. I like that. And it's kind of like, well, and that's again why you need to speak to as many users as you can, as across a broader range of demographics and locations and everything else. I mean, on that note, how do you, as a UX designer, and how can, say, UX designers in general ensure they have an impact on the product teams they're working with, or the service teams in the case of government?
That is a great question. So I think recognizing perhaps that it's not always possible. How can people ensure? So one of the things that I will often do, and it's not just checkpoints, but I'll often think about. I think to be good at what we do, we really have to. Especially, it depends how long you're working with something, what your remit is. But often I will work with a project for around a year, maybe 2 years. So there's enough time to get emotionally invested. And I think to really empathize, and if you're speaking to potentially hundreds of users over that time, it's hard not to have. I know it sounds silly, but genuine empathy for there's emotional connections to what you're doing. I think sometimes there's a point you have to be realistic and say, look, can anything be done to solve this, and recognize that not the technical capabilities of the team, but the remit of a team to change something, for example. So I think understanding what being realistic about what the team can do, and sort of basically setting your expectations to being realistic about what you can achieve. I think sort of ingraining, really being part of the cycle. So I specialize. I work pretty much entirely with web-based products that are intended to be consumed by a browser on various devices. So it has a particular sort of tech, set of tech stacks, and I'm not sure how transposable this sort of thing is. But actually being involved in making sure design isn't separate to development. There's a joined up. There's a real joining up of everything. So these sort of exercises don't happen in a siloed way. And also, again, it may be specific to this particular setup, but the development of something and the design of something, I say, just making that joined up and making a concerted effort to really think about the handoff. So speaking with the recipients of your output and really thinking about how you can make it as easy as possible, for them to sort of utilize, and rather than the chucking something over the fence and hope it lands. I've worked with some teams that literally work in different locations. The design team have different project like boards, whether it's Trello or Jira, whatever people are using, it's separate. There's a very clear separation, and in those sorts of examples, I very rarely see the adoption of design thinking. So yeah, I guess being joined up, and I know it sounds basic, we'll mark and edit videos down to say, look, this articulates what a trend that we're seeing, and try and make it easier for people to consume some of the stuff that we have. Obviously there's a danger there that we're we choose the narrative, but really having people, developers, delivery managers, people that are responsible for, obviously have empathy for those people as well that have a job to do, and things to deliver, budgets to manage, but making it as easy as possible to see the things that we're seeing for people.
And your comment earlier about throwing things over the fence, that resonates a lot. And I've seen that particularly in agency world, where the agency will do one part, say the shiny front end, and then it's literally sent to somewhere else for the development to happen. And unless the team's kind of cohesive and working together and has sort of been on that journey, it's quite hard for it to make sense.
We see as well many multidisciplinary teams built up with teams that from different often within the consultant world, different suppliers. So you have contractual agreements that differ. So a team may be made up of three different. So a design thing has a duty design, but the obligations for the development team may be to do something in a particular way. They may look at something that's incompatible, but regardless, I think it's that being joined up. If you're not joined up for whatever reason, whether it's location, whether it's difference in incompatibility of like contractual statements of work, this sort of thing. If a team isn't joined up, I think that's where going back to the the crux of the question about, how do you make things succeed. I think being realistic, and if you're part of a team that you suspect that it's not really possible to, you're working with a particular supplier that the organization doesn't have the same ethos or doesn't buy into user-centric design. There's one supplier that I worked with for quite some time. I mean, it was embarrassing what their view on user-centric design was, and it's, it completely doesn't align with the client that they're working for, or mine, and how much, well, what I consider success, which is a product that meets the needs identified for users. Yeah, just being realistic, I think, and often, if you can't. We can't always pick and choose the work we do. At the end of the day, as I said, it's not about money, but sometimes, we have to pay bills. We're in, sometimes you have to lump it and do things that don't quite sit right.
Totally. So talk me through a typical day for you as a UX designer, interaction designer, whether it be on the current project or sort of prior to that, kind of generally.
Yeah.
What does it look like?
Well, I mentioned before, we've spoken about GDS. We've spoken about the various sort of processes that are in place. So in terms of discovering whether there's a need in the first place before assigning budget to a particular problem, we know about the various phases within government, and that method is something that I subscribe to totally. So, and that was before I'd even done any work in government. So whether things are in sort of private enterprise, where I'm working with someone that isn't bound by these sort of the checks and balances of an assessment and these sorts of things, I heavily subscribe to it, and I always try and work in that way. So the reason I mention that is it very much depends on the phase that we're working. So if we're in a discovery phase where we're trying to understand a problem, the need for a solution, or whether we're in an alpha phase or a beta phase, we're in a live phase where we're actually supporting or iterating. I think the day-to-day activities differ somewhat. So in many respects, it depends on the phase of the life cycle or phase of a particular project. But for today, in all of those phases, one would hope a particular day is carved up nicely between speaking or observing users with a product. I personally like to work in sort of 2-week sprints of design sprints, whether it's in sync with more development, sprints delivery, or whether we just as a design team do something slightly different but not unrelated. And I know that may sound like it sort of contradicts what I mentioned before, but having a succinct sort of goal or problem to solve in a short cycle is typically how it would work. So trying to get insight into that particular problem statement that you're working on as a team, getting insight and sort of working on perhaps prototypes, the outputs that I'll be putting together, or documentation or insight that help sort of get us a better understanding of what that problem statement was.
So how, in your experience, should UX designers like yourself work with, let's say, user researchers or content designers, or the sort of the other members of the UX team, if you like?
I find, before sort of answering that, I just sort of recognize that most of the people that I've worked with, I mentioned before about titles. UX designer is I don't mind what I'm called, but I know what I do, and I know regardless of the title that I'm given, I typically work in the same way. But I think obviously with UX designer being such a wide, it's the umbrella. For me, it's an umbrella term. So I think it's and I this isn't the way that I work isn't supposed to sort of sound dogmatic or say this is how people should work, but I think it gives us enough I guess autonomy to decide because it's such an umbrella term, we can sort of decide how best we work. But I see myself as a sort of a utility of a user research team. So I see myself as a utility for the user research function, if that makes sense. So I'm here to hopefully help shape a little the sorts of things we might be wanting to solve in terms of issues with an interface. Like I say, this is specific to interfaces, but helping with hypotheses of what we think might work well given a particular insight that we want to see. We might work on call upon previous experience or sort of other heuristics that we think are going to work, conventions, things that I might recommend that we utilize these to sort of gain insight and produce artifacts to prompt and work with users to get the insight. But I believe my role is really to facilitate that flow of information from user to team.
Right. And you sort of touched on this earlier, but in terms of kind of how you share and socialize the insights you're learning as a team, how do you traditionally do that, whether it be you individually or kind of as a UX team?
Wow, that's a very good. So traditionally is a funny one, I think, because obviously it was still a bit of a frontier. The way we're working, there isn't a universal way of working. So I think again, understanding what the appetite for this sort of thing is. I say by this sort of thing, I mean, working with in government, fortunately, and I mean that fortunately, it's sort of mandated. As ways of working are mandated, so teams would often rather not be working the way we are, but they have to, and that's a good thing. But in other walks of life, in sort of private enterprise, there may be someone's only giving X amount of budget or time to a particular thing, so you don't have the luxury of assessments or the sort of lengthy playbacks. It has to be a bit more informal, like this is what we found. So it will depend on the appetite for, unfortunately, I still believe that most projects are run by individuals, or there's an overwhelming, okay, so not overwhelming, but maybe a majority held view that the user centric design process is frivolous. It's a nice to have. I find I'm usually the most under resourced, first to go, last to come in. It's maybe the cherry on top in a lot of places. So if that's the case, I have to you have to be sort of very efficient and effective with what you're doing. So I find the types of output really depend on the appetite for, or the respect afforded to the discipline.
And is that linked to the kind of level of maturity of UX within the organization?
Yeah, I think it's intrinsically linked. If the maturity is there, then there's already a culture, there's a practice, you've got more people on the floor. Your corner is being, you don't have to fight for anything. Often brought into places where there is no existing sort of practice, and you're having to instill to what I believe are very skeptical people with the purse strings. And yeah, often, in fact, I think it's quite an interesting point there. Often you're telling the people that are ultimately responsible. So often, with startups, a lot of the founders, you tell them things that they already know. And they just think, what's the point of this? And what I found is that the rest of the, teams are then that's your vision. They're aligned. So what you're doing is you're telling some people what they already know, but you're documenting, you're bringing out, and you're mapping out end-to-end processes that actually was only known by say experts or people. So you help align views and that sort of thing. But I find those particular outputs quite I refer to them as is diagrams, just showing what the current state looks like, service blueprints that just map out what something looks like that you can bring alignment, so people can synchronize their views. And
that's a fascinating perspective. So your role is as much make sure everyone's on the same page as it is flagging things that it might be new to members of the client or the stakeholder team.
Yeah, exactly. So everyone's interested in solutions, but if we don't have an aligned sort of understanding of not just the problem statements, so we touch on user needs, aligning our understanding of why we're doing something, but again, just internally what we have to play with. I think that synchronization, when we're all trying to work on a common solution, having a common starting point, I think is very, very interesting. It's one of the things, I think as UXers, I know this is going to be audio, but I've got some quotation marks going up there. As UXers, I think it's an important part of what we do as well. It's about aligning.
So what, following on from that, then, what characteristics or personality traits do you think, Ben, make a good UXer, whether it be UX designer, user researcher, somebody else?
Interesting one. I mean, the first thing that came to mind was someone that's quite strong, can basically continue to get across a point and be clear that it's not necessarily their opinion. They're a conduit for information, and when someone's maybe louder voices are saying you're wrong, standing your ground, basically saying, but I'm just a conduit. I'm just telling you what we've heard. I'm relaying information. But that said, my first thought was a strong personality or someone that can hold their own, stay calm, and be a people person with stakeholders, and again, like, help the facilitation of the shared information. But I've seen very successful, very brilliant individuals that have sort of new to the discipline, are quite naturally perhaps timid and don't really have that sort of that trait or those sorts of characteristics that again just operate just as well. So I'm in terms of a sort of personality characteristic, I don't know. I think the ability to not rub people up the wrong way, I think is a good thing.
That's a
And
life skill in general, isn't
yeah,
it?
right. But I think more so being, if I had to tie something down, see being strong, but clear that you're representing these views, not necessarily my own. A little disclaimer.
And that's interesting because you're talking there about the soft skills, and that's come through again and again with lots of other guests in this series, that the soft skills are almost as important, if not as important, as the kind of skills of the trade, if you like, of how you go about UX. It's kind of what you do with that and how you convince people and persuasion and narrative.
It's 100%. So we recently, I was asked if I could provide a little bit of work experience for someone that I'd worked with for relation affairs, and I asked, and someone that I was working with at the time were very receptive, and they were like, yeah, they can join sort of meetings and calls, and we made sure that everyone was comfortable before that individual. But what I was interested in doing is this individual had done a UX and UI degree for 3 years, albeit during COVID, so things were a little bit not traditional. But you're conscious of the fact that you don't need me to tell you how to conduct research or some of the things that you can learn in the classroom. So I was more keen to sort of bring that individual into meetings with stakeholders, but also with this other decision makers and people that had been on the floor, and seeing how there's this there's a little bit of a not strategy, but there's massaging of egos. There's often people want to be decision. They want their decision to be theirs. That they want to have their own stamp. But we're trying to make a decision for this 50 hours of one-to-one research that we've just done. So how do we? So about sort of stakeholder management. So that sort of thing that you can't necessarily learn in a classroom.
So on that note, kind of an aspiring UX designer, let's say, what advice would you give someone in the case of that individual? Like if someone else came to you and said, "Hey, I want to get into this world," what would you tell them?
Well, I can maybe speak about the conversations that we had with the individual that I'm talking about. I sensed pretty quickly that the passion wasn't necessarily in the same field as me. So I've mentioned before, I'm passionate about the web, about standards-based things you can do in a browser. I love the fact that most of us, I've been fortunate recently to do some work in different continents. I think I've worked on 4 continents, but basically there are certain things that everyone seems to have available to them, and basically browsers are. So I'm very passionate about that particular thing. I know this is I've gone off a bit of a tangent, but the particular individual wasn't really that didn't feel like there's this like natural sort of draw to the web, more to do with experiences, like physical experiences and immersive experiences. So I'd be sort of loath to give any sort of advice, not recognizing that when we're thinking about users of things, it really depends on the medium. I don't know if there was someone specifically looking at the web and thinking that's the medium that appeals to me, I'd like to speak with people that improve experiences on the web. I'd then in fact, maybe this is transposable. Understanding the medium, so not just the solution, but my recommendation would be to, as best you can, understand the medium that you're designing for, all the constraints that are there, all the realistic, the reasons not to do particular things.
Your own career, Ben, where do you see it going over the next 5-10 years? That sounds like a real interview question. It's not meant to be, but just based on kind of where you've been thus far and where you are at the moment, how would you like it to progress?
I still see myself doing the same thing, perhaps in 5-10 years. Hopefully not as say I've been working as a consultant. I'd love to commit to something that, for a real full lifespan of a particular product or organization that I really aligned with, or something that I really sort of believed in. But yeah, I see myself still doing the same thing, but I don't know what the outputs, what solutions will look like. But I feel confident that the conversations, the methods, the concern about the needs of individuals, the human that is at the center of all the things that we're doing. I can't really imagine. Well, it's not foreseeable, right? Great change there, but I do foresee the solution changing a great deal.
That's absolutely spot on, isn't it? And you're talking about, I suppose, in essence, kind of future-proofing your career. Technology changes fast, but humans don't. And so the need to focus on the human element of it will always be there, or hopefully always be there. It should always be there. Okay, then the last thing is a 3-card challenge. And as you know, I've been doing this with everyone. So we've got a diamond, a heart, and a spade. I'll just get you to choose one of those.
I'll go for that. The spades.
So on the spade is technique. So tell me about your favored or favorite UX design technique.
Putting something
and why.
So it's, again, and I appreciate this is so hugely connected to the very particular medium I have, but technique would be, in fact, I think it's applicable to anything. Put something in someone's hand, put something tangible in someone's. Okay, maybe not always in someone's hand. It depends on your medium, but in mine, just have someone use the thing. Use tangible, contextual things, not abstract ideas. So the technique for me would just be knocking up rapidly, creating a if it's something for the web, I'm not going to design. I'm not going to mock something up that's a picture that looks like something. The web, I can in less time I can create something that is like a basic version of the thing that hopefully they'll be using. So the technique is produce put tangible things into people's hands and observe and learn.
Brilliant. Next to
it's got to be that heart, I think.
The heart is a tool. So what's your favorite tool?
So I guess as an extension of what I've just said, it's any text editor. So the 3 pillars of the web, what happens in a browser on the client side and user interface, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. At the end of the day, there's many different ways we can produce those sort of 3 pillars. But vanilla, we can just write them in a notepad and produce them. Obviously, I wouldn't do that, but if I had to choose a particular tool, it would be some sort of text editor to create the thing that I just mentioned.
Right. Nice and simple. I like that. And the last one, trend. What trend do you foresee, or would you like to see in your discipline over the next year or 2 or 3?
So the last couple of weeks have been, certainly in my household, been dominated by Wordle. And the thing that, and I think a couple of days ago it was, brought out by the New York Times, I believe. So maybe things will change. But the trend I'd like to see continue is people reverting to simplicity. So Wordle is a JavaScript application. Uses about 100 kilobytes of JavaScript without any big name framework, and it's so simple. It's browser based. It's not an app. It uses local storage. You don't need to log in. You're not really being actively tracked and having adverts. It's simple. It's the way the web was. It's the simplicity before people are monetizing everything. I would like to see that sort of trend continue. Just simple, brilliant execution of fun things.
That's great, isn't it? And that point, it kind of makes the price that was paid for it all the more eye-watering, because, as you say, the actual what's underlying it is
100%. I mean, the way it works as well. I think there's a BBC article for anyone that, and not just BBC, many articles about how you can have it running for the next 7 years. Because I think the makeup of the JavaScript underneath, it's just the dictionary is the bulk of it. And I think if you save it right now, you can use the same thing for the next 7 years. So.
Well, we've come to the end of our chat, Ben, and thank you so much. It's been great to catch up as always, and thank you for sharing all of your wisdom and your years of experience.
You're welcome.
Thanks for listening to the Understanding Users podcast. If you enjoyed what you heard, do please like or comment wherever you're listening, and feel free to share it more widely. And feel free, of course, to drop me a line with any feedback via LinkedIn or my website, researchable.uk. Links are in the show notes. Join me again next time when I'll be talking to Tim Blass, Experienced Design Lead at the agency MMT Digital, on his experience of building user-centered products for clients throughout his career. Until then, stay safe and stay user-centered.